is the new 2020 Mercedes-Benz GLS, and it's a big deal. I say that because the full-size luxury SUV segment is really hot right now, with the BMW X7 and the new Lincoln Navigator and the updated Range Rover all coming out within the last year and a half. The new GLS is Mercedes' answer to all those vehicles, and today I'm going to review it. I've borrowed this GLS from Fletcher Jones MOTORCARS, which is a Mercedes-Benz dealership here in Newport Beach in Southern California that sells more Mercedes than any other dealership in the country. Now, the new GLS has just arrived at Fletcher Jones, and it is sure to be a big hit. I say that because, like I mentioned before, the full-size luxury SUV segment is absolutely blowing up in popularity, and the new GLS seems poised to compete. This is the GLS450, and the starting price is around $76,000, which is about $5,000 more than the base price of the outgoing model, but you also get a lot more stuff, which I'll show you in a little bit. The GLS450 uses a turbocharged 6-cylinder that makes 360 horsepower and 370 pound-feet of torque, and all-wheel drive is standard. If you want more power, Mercedes-Benz offers it. The GLS450 will soon be followed up by the GLS580 with a twin-turbo V8 that makes 480 horsepower and 515 pound-feet of torque. And I have no doubt that an AMG GLS63 will soon be on the way as well. As for competition, the GLS faces some tough ones. The BMW X7 and the new Lincoln Navigator are both fantastic vehicles, and a new Cadillac Escalade is reportedly on the way. The GLS also competes with the latest Range Rover and Mercedes-owned G-Wagon, although those vehicles don't have third-row seating like the GLS does. But anyway, today I'm going to see how the new GLS stacks up. First, I'm going to take you on a tour of the GLS and show you all of the interesting quirks and features of the latest Mercedes-Benz SUV. Then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. And for more of my thoughts on the new GLS, click the link below to visit autotrader.com/oversteer, where I've also rounded up a list of my favorite old school luxury SUVs currently listed for sale on AutoTrader.
I'm going to start the quirks and features of the GLS with an amazing new feature called Augmented Reality Navigation. This is in the center screen, and if you have it navigate you to a destination, it will show you on the map how to get there, as you can see. But check this out. You approach an intersection where you have to make a turn, and it actually uses the car's camera to show you in real time where your next turn is. See those arrows in that street name? That's where you're turning, and it's amazing how well this works. Come up to the next turn, and again, the nav system doesn't just show you on a map where to turn, but actually shows you in real life with arrows and a street sign. This makes navigation way cooler, of course, but it also makes it a lot harder to miss a turn. Anyway, I wanted to cover that first. Now on to the rest of the quirks and features, and I'm going to start in the back seat, since this is, after all, a family SUV.
And so in the back of this one, you have two separate rear seat captain's chairs. One cool thing with these second row captain's chairs is the fact that they are full power seats. You don't see that very often, even in luxury SUVs, but these have the seat controls on the door, and you can move them backward and forward, power automatically. You don't have to pull any levers or pull any tabs and kind of position the seat. You even have full power for the rear headrests, which you really never see in any vehicles, even full-size luxury SUVs, short of like Rolls-Royce or Bentley, but the new GLS has rear power headrests. And speaking of things that are power operated back here, obviously you have power windows, but you also have a power rear sunshade. If you pull up on the power window button when the window is up, the sunshade will automatically roll up and unfurl itself, and then you can be shaded from the sun. This may seem like a bit of a gimmick, but it's actually a very good feature for new parents of infants who are very sensitive to the light, because instead of having to clip on some sunshade to the window, you just press the button and it rolls right up, very easy. Next up, another nice touch back here is the fact that you have 2 individual rear climate zones. So both passengers can set their own temperature and they don't have to fight over which temperature they want, or just accept whatever temperature the front passengers have chosen. Now, one thing I absolutely love, when you adjust the temperature here in the back, the little ambient lighting below the seats changes corresponding to what you've done. If you make it warmer, the ambient lighting temporarily turns red for warmth. If you make the temperature back here cooler, then the ambient lighting color temporarily turns blue for cold. And I just love that it does that. That is kind of a cheap little gimmick, but they got me. I think that's a really cool party trick in the back of the GLS. And one other nice feature in the back of the GLS, if you open up this compartment in between the 2 seats, you can see quite a few charge ports in here. You have 2 USB-C chargers, which are of course nice to have, and you have a household style power outlet back here, which is very, very convenient. You can, for example, plug in your blender in the back of your GLS so you can blend as you drive along. One other item worth noting in the back of the GLS, if you look over at the climate vents, these little dials to open and close them, don't they look like Oreos? I mean, seriously, you have the black on the top and bottom, the white in the middle. These look like some sort of thin Oreos that you might have if you're on a diet, but you still want Oreos. That's all I see when I look at those things. And next up, I want to talk about third row seat access in the GLS. And from over here, the third row access is really disappointing. You only have one option to get into the third row. You pull on this red fabric loop, and that drops down the seat. But there's no path to make it easier to climb in. You actually have to stand here and press the little seat control on the door and wait for the seat to slide forward. And it takes several seconds every time you want to climb in and out of the third row. And we all know children don't have the patience to do that. But in terms of third row seat access, there is some good news, and it comes over on this side of the new GLS, the passenger side, and it comes in the form of a button near the top of the seat, near the headrest. You can see the passenger side rear seat has it. The driver side rear seat does not have that button. That button makes all the difference, because if you push that button, the seat does everything for you. It folds forward a little bit, it moves forward completely, and it provides you with tremendously easy third row access. That is probably the best third row access button and process that I've ever seen in any 3-row SUV. There are 2 real benefits here. One is that it doesn't fold the seat all the way down. That allows you to leave a car seat in the second row seat and still access the third row. Not every SUV does that. The other benefit is that even though the seat is not folded forward so the car seat can stay put, you still have a really good and large pathway to get into the third row. So large, in fact, that even I can climb back there without all that much difficulty. And so this works really, really well. It's a fantastic second row, third row access point. My only complaint is I wish they had it on both sides. But anyway, since I'm here in the third row of the new GLS, let's talk third row. First, I want to talk about moving this seat back into position. Your kids have climbed into the third row, and now you want to get this seat back where it was. You don't have to hold down the buttons on the door. You just press that little button near the headrest again, and the seat again automatically falls right back into place exactly where it was, so you don't really have to do anything other than push a button. Now, when that seat is in place, I don't have a whole lot of room here in the third row, but more than I was expecting and more than I get in many other SUVs. The packaging here is fantastic, and I, as an adult, would sit in this third row. Wouldn't be the most comfortable, but it is tolerable. I have more headroom and knee room than usual. And 2 other interesting items worth noting about the third row. One is the USB-C ports. I showed you there were 2 of them in the second row. Well, there are 4 of them in the third row, 2 over on the passenger side, and then you have another 2 over on the driver's side, so you can charge a lot of devices back here in the third row of the GLS. That's the most charge ports I've ever seen in the third row of any vehicle I've reviewed. The other interesting thing about the third row is what happens when you want to climb out. You just push the button again, and the seat starts to do its thing. This does take a little longer than you'd expect, but it's nice to just be able to tap one button and it does it all, and then you have enough space to climb right out, and so you do it. And next up, I want to move on to another area of the GLS where families who are considering buying one of these will be very interested in, and that would be the cargo area. I'm going to start with probably my favorite cargo area feature, and that's the cargo cover. I like this because, as you can see, the space that the cargo area has to cover is pretty small, and yet, in case you ever want to cover your bumper while it rains, you can do that with the extra massive cargo cover. Actually, the real reason that it pulls out so far is that you can detach the cargo cover and then you can fold down the third row of seats and place the cargo cover behind the second row, and then it will cover all of your cargo. And that way you have the option of using it for just the cargo area behind the third row or for the entire cargo area back here. And speaking of this cargo area behind the third row, not particularly interesting or especially large. Seems like it's about average for a 3-row full-size luxury SUV. No crazy surprises back here. But of course, you can make the cargo area considerably larger by folding down the seats. And folding down the seats in the back of the GLS is really, really easy to do. Over on the right side of the cargo area, you have little buttons you can press to fold down the third row seats. That's pretty common in these full-size luxury SUVs to be able to fold down the seats with a button rather than fumbling around with latches and doing it yourself. You can also use these buttons to fold the seats back up, and of course you can do it individually, just the left seat, just the right seat, or both seats together if you want. But nothing particularly unusual there for full-size luxury SUVs. The cool party trick for the GLS is the fact that you can also fold down the second row of seats using a button back here. That button is over on the left side, the driver's side of the cargo area. You press that and it will drop the second row captain's chairs. Now again, a lot of SUVs will allow you to do that, but usually you push a button, they fall down, and that's the end of it. But in the GLS, you can also use those buttons to pull the second row seats back up, and that is a pretty cool feature. That means you can control all the seating back here, and that means you can make the cargo area as big or as small as you want, literally with the push of a button. And the benefit is obvious. If you're trying to load some big box back here that won't quite fit, you can just drop as many seats as you need automatically without having to go around and pull latches. And then when you take the box back out, you can just put the seats right back up. Now, speaking of loading a big box back here, let's pretend it's heavy. As you can see, this load floor is pretty far off the ground to lift something heavy. That's where the last button in the cargo area comes in handy. It's the one that will lower the GLS. You press that and the air suspension in the GLS automatically lowers it down by a few inches, which will make it that much easier to load something heavy in. You just don't have to lift it quite as far, and that too is a pretty cool little party trick. By the way, one other thing worth mentioning about the cargo area back here, this is the little latch that you pull in order to lift up the cargo floor, and it gives you access to the spare tire, the tools, and all that stuff. Pretty standard, but it's off center. You can see the latch for the tailgate on center, the middle of the third row on center, but then this thing over to the side, just a few inches. Why? Why did they do that? That is the kind of thing that will keep me up at night. Just a few inches over and it would have been perfect back here. Why do you have to mess with me like that, Mercedes-Benz? Now, next up, I want to talk about exterior styling. The new GLS keeps roughly the same proportions as the old model, but the exterior styling is quite a bit different, and you will notice it the moment you see one. In fact, I happen to think that this is the biggest design change for this vehicle since it was launched back in 2007 as the GL. It's a very, very different look, more rounded, more modern, and it fits in more with the design language of the new Mercedes-Benz GLE, which was also recently redesigned. And next up, we move under the hood in the new GLS, and one of the things you might be most surprised about is the fact that there is a 6-cylinder engine powering this large, full-size, heavy luxury SUV. That's actually been going on for a few years now. The GL450, as it was called before, used to have a standard V8, but in 2015 they went to a V6 instead with about the same power numbers. For 2020, the new GLS actually uses a different 6-cylinder engine. Like I mentioned, 360 horsepower, 370 pound-feet of torque. Now those are about the same numbers as the outgoing V6, but this engine is different. It is an inline 6, a straight 6 rather than a V, and it has kind of a mild hybrid component. Driving the car, you probably won't notice that much difference, maybe a little bit more throttle response down low, but the real key here is fuel economy. By adding that mild hybrid portion and going with sort of a more modern engine design, Mercedes-Benz increased the fuel economy from 18 miles per gallon in combined city and highway driving in the old GLS to 21 miles per gallon city and highway in the new model, despite keeping the same horsepower and torque ratings, and that's a pretty good increase. And next we move on to the front of the new GLS, where the interior is dramatically different and dramatically improved compared to the outgoing model. The biggest difference in here is undoubtedly Mercedes' new MBUX infotainment system, but I've already reviewed that in depth in two other new Mercedes models, the new CLA and the new A-Class. I will link those in the description below, and instead I'll just give you sort of a brief overview of some of MBUX's features in a couple of minutes. But first, I want to talk over some of the other interesting interior quirks and features, and I want to start with this dial in the center. There's this rather large dial or switch, and you can see the picture above it has a car with arrows. That's because that's the dial you move in order to raise or lower the GLS. You push it up and the GLS raises up for rough roads. You push it down and it lowers so that it's easier for people to get in if they have trouble climbing up. When the GLS is in its fully raised position, it looks ridiculous, like a GLS monster truck, but it is cool to see the full range of motion and how much ground clearance you really can get when you raise up this thing. And next up, another interesting item in the front seats is the fact that in the middle, in the center of the dashboard, you have 4 climate vents. Some cars have 2, some cars have 3. My Ford GT has 1. This thing has 4, meaning the passenger gets 2 of those and the driver gets 2 of those. Now that's in addition to the climate vents you have on the very sides of the dashboard, meaning that both front seat passengers get 3 vents to themselves for optimal climate controlling. And next up, another interesting item in the new GLS is over on the door panel. You can see you have controls for the seat there and the memory settings, and you also have the buttons for the heated and cooled seat. And then there's another button. It's a seat marked R. So what exactly is that? Well, if you push that, it allows you to control the right seat or the passenger seat. So you press that little R and then you use your driver's side seat controls and it will move the passenger seat, which is a great party trick. You can really mess with your passenger without telling them. Just push the button and start moving their seat around. Of course, there's also a practical benefit. If you have someone sitting in the back and they need more room and there's no one sitting in the front passenger seat, you can easily control it from the driver's seat without having to reach over. And next up, we move on to the sun visor in the GLS, or should I say, the sun visors. You drop your sun visor and then move it over to the side because the sun is coming through the side window, and guess what? There's another sun visor there for the front. This is what happens when you pay $90,000 for an SUV. 2 sun visors. Pretty nice. And next up, another item worth noting, you have this giant screen housing that takes up a lot of the dashboard over on the driver's side and in the middle. And you can see to the left of that screen, you have a climate vent. Now to the right of that screen, you have no climate vent because you have those 4 in the middle instead. But they've kept the look of the climate vent, I guess, for symmetry. Now, the interesting thing here is you have this group of horizontal lines, and 2 of the lines are larger than all the others. That's because over on the left, those 2 lines represent the climate vent, but on the right, they're just lines. And so if you look at that, you'll see 2 of the lines are a little thicker than the others. This is the same level of annoyance as that off-center cargo latch on the cargo floor. I feel like you just look at those 2 lines and you're constantly thinking, those 2 lines are thicker. And finally, we move on to the infotainment system in this car, which, like I mentioned, is Mercedes' new MBUX system. And like I also mentioned, I've covered it in greater detail in the new CLA and the A-Class, which I'll link below.
But there are a few highlights I want to mention. For one thing, I love that MBUX is controllable in 3 ways. You can use it as a touchscreen, or you can use this pad in the center, or you can control it with steering wheel buttons. It's nice to be able to choose whichever is most comfortable for you. I also love how quickly MBUX responds if you do use it as a touchscreen. It's not quite smartphone quick, but it's really close behind. I also love how configurable the gauge cluster situation is in MBUX. You can reset the gauge clusters to show pretty much whatever you want: vehicle info, navigation, driver aids, speedometer, all within your line of sight, which is really nice to have. And you can make the navigation map full screen if you want. In past videos I thought you couldn't, but you can, and then you have a full screen map right below your field of vision when you're driving along, which is a great idea.
Now, you can also use your gauge cluster screen to change what gauge cluster theme you have going on. You have the typical options like standard or sporty, but then there's one called progressive. You click on that, and apparently this is what Mercedes-Benz thinks progressive gauge cluster dials look like. And I will admit, it does look kind of futuristic and, dare I say, progressive.
One more MBUX item worth noting: when you first set it up, you can pick an avatar, a little picture that represents you. I guess this is used later on in the system somewhere, and I think it's just funny. Another intersection of cars and cell phones.
Next up, I love all the different themes that it offers. You go into the infotainment system, you can choose between a bunch of different themes, which instantly configure all sorts of settings throughout the interior to match that theme. Now, I mentioned the themes when I was reviewing the CLA, but I bring it up here because there's a new theme in the GLS called Adventure, and you can see there's a picture of a G-Wagon like off-roading. You click on Adventure and all sorts of things change in here. Specifically, you have the off-road modes come up in the gauge cluster to let you know your roll and pitch and exactly what wheels you're using. And in the infotainment system, your cameras come up so that you can see what boulders you're about to cross over. Those themes are another interesting and rather cool idea of MBUX. Since there's so much configurable stuff in this car, you just set a theme and it configures it all at once. And so those are the quirks and features of the new Mercedes-Benz GLS. Now it's time to get it out on the road and see how it drives. All right, driving the new GLS. My first impression of the new GLS is its classic Mercedes-Benz, very high quality, good evolution on the old car. With that said, there are not as many party tricks and kind of special stuff in here as you get in the new Navigator and the new X7. The X7, it feels a little bit different. It feels a little bit more, I guess the word would be special, more exciting. With that said, the X7 I reviewed was pretty pricey. It was about $10,000 more than this, which has like an $81,000, $82,000 sticker. Compared to the Navigator though, same deal. The Navigator has all these cool party tricks like the push button transmission, the 20 zillion way seats with all this comfort bubbles and stuff. This is not quite on that level. This just feels like a very nice, high quality, well thought out Mercedes-Benz, but it doesn't seem to go that crazy distance that those models do in kind of helping pull you in. But it's important to understand that all that stuff isn't exactly necessary. If you just want a really, really high quality vehicle with everything that you need and a lot of really nice stuff that you want, this gets you there just as well as X7 and Navigator. You don't need 3 rows of ambient lighting. You don't need 26-way seats. And this offers MBUX, which Lincoln and BMW don't have. And MBUX is definitely a step above BMW's latest infotainment system. It's probably 2 steps above Lincoln's latest infotainment system. It's just so good, so easy to use, so intuitive. Now, in terms of the driving experience, I really do like the way that this drives. Obviously, it's a big vehicle. It doesn't feel incredibly large. I really like this 6-cylinder. I've driven it in some other cars, the new Mercedes CLS, and it's great. I actually do, even though the power and torque numbers are the same as the old V6, you do notice a little bit of a difference down low because of that hybrid system. I think it eliminates some of the lag that you associate with turbocharged engines. So you get a little bit more responsiveness and like 15% better fuel economy with this engine. Obviously, another big benefit over the old one is the interior and the technology. Everything is nicer in here. The look on the outside is nicer, but MBUX, it's hard to really overstate just how big of a deal MBUX is. Otherwise, you kind of have everything that if you know the GLS, you've driven previous ones, pretty standard to the GLS. You have a nice roomy interior, very comfortable ride. You don't hear much wind, tire noise, anything like that. There's good visibility in all directions. You have a good kind of sitting high up driving position. And of course, very comfortable, very supple in here. Like I mentioned, the window sticker is low $80,000 range. This is how most people will get this car, with about $6,000 in options over the base price. And although the base price has increased a lot, for 2020, you now have MBUX, you have a better vehicle overall. And so I think it helps justify that increased price. If you don't want to spend the money, the new GLE is also brand new for 2020. And it's basically this vehicle, but just sized down a little bit. Also a very, very good vehicle. And so that's the new Mercedes-Benz GLS. This is an excellent full-size luxury SUV, but it competes in a world of excellent full-size luxury SUVs. And I would have a hard time choosing between this and the BMW X7 and the new Lincoln Navigator and the new Range Rover and the new Mercedes G-Wagon, because they're just all so good. Then again, when you're spending $90,000 or $100,000 on a new SUV, I guess that's a good problem to have. Anyway, now it's time to give the 2020 GLS a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the GLS is fine, nothing too special, and it gets a 6 out of 10. Acceleration 0 to 60 is 5.9 seconds, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Handling is average for the class, and it gets a 4 out of 10. Fun factor is low. This is decidedly unfun, even for a luxury SUV, since it doesn't have a lot of the cool wow factor features of its rivals, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Finally, cool factor, and the GLS is by far the most common big luxury SUV. These are too common to be cool, and it gets a 4 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 21 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories and features. It has an enormous amount of stuff, including that awesome augmented reality navigation, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Comfort is good, normal for the class, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Quality is high, but materials are not quite on the level of the best in class, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Practicality is excellent, harmed only by gas mileage and the driver's side third row access, and it gets a 9 out of 10. Finally, value, and it has all the right stuff. It's expensive, but that's the way luxury SUVs go. It gets a 6 out of 10 for a total daily score of 39 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 60 out of 100, and here's where it falls against other luxury SUVs. The GLS loses out to the BMW X7 and the Lincoln Navigator, with the Mercedes losing a few points, mostly due to cool factor and wow features in the interior. The GLS is a very competent car, and while it's not quite as alluring as the X7 or the Navigator, it's still a very solid choice with great technology.